Welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. And this week I wanted to talk about patience. I don't think I would have been qualified to talk about patience early on in my career. It was probably the quality that I most lacked. And this is despite having been through a 7-year journey with ME chronic fatigue. In some ways, because of the fact that I'd been through that journey, I wanted everything to happen quickly. And I think sometimes, perhaps like a lot of people in their early 20s, I was too quick to kind of put myself in certain situations or to try and push certain things forward. And one of the things that I really come to value and appreciate, actually in many areas of my life over the years, is the importance of being patient and the right things happening at the right time. In fact, I'll give you a current example. I mentioned in yesterday's vlog that I just signed a publishing deal for a book on the Optimum Health Clinic approach to recovering from fatigue. And I think I mentioned yesterday as well that there was only one publisher that I wanted to work with on the book. It was pretty much I'm going to self-publish or I'm going to go with this publisher. And the person that made the introduction to me for the publisher, I've known for 7 or 8 years. And a few years ago, there was a window of opportunity where it seemed like the right time. So they made an introduction. I went and met with the UK CEO of the publisher. But I knew it wasn't the right time for this book. So I didn't pitch this book. But I invested in that relationship. And then when it was time, when I felt the time was right, having just done the Fatigue Super Conference, and that was in some ways was a kind of research process for me in terms of updating some of my knowledge. It was the right time, the right relationship, and it was an almost effortless agreement to put the plan in place. And I've known I was going to write this book for about 15 years. And I've put out a lot of content through video, audio, things like this over the years. And yet I felt that I wanted this book to be a really well thought out, researched, kind of, I think definitive is the wrong word, but a really comprehensive, refined book that captures all of my knowledge, as much of my knowledge as is relevant for a book like that in this area. And I was thinking about this video, of course, that kind of journey came to mind of the importance of patience and timing at each step of that. But also I was thinking about some of the complex cases that I've worked with over the years, and also some of the significant life transformations that have happened, and how life really does have its own timing. And we can enter into all kinds of debate and resistance and frustration and everything else about that. And yet, there is often this sense of there being this inherent wisdom that sometimes we don't really know why we met a certain person at a certain time in a certain way, or we watched a certain video, or we read a certain article, or whatever it may be. And I think that there's a kind of, the more that we can trust in that process, the more that we can also, in a sense, it invites a surrender and an acceptance that is often otherwise not there. There's this kind of panicked sense that I have to figure this out and I have to get this all right immediately, as opposed to trusting the journey and the process. One of the ways I would put it is I think that often we significantly overestimate what we think we can achieve or what can happen in the short term. We often significantly underestimate what can happen in the long term. So like on the recovery path, we can often have unrealistic expectations for the next kind of few weeks or few months. But because we can't see things, so we think we're going to get recovered super quickly. Or we think because we can't see something in the short term that it's never going to happen in the long term. And the more that we, in a sense, often big dramatic changes are the product of lots of small changes along the way. like lots of small insight shifts, practicing of that, refining of that, improving of that. And that builds up towards ultimately a significant change happening in our lives. But if we're looking for the big change quickly, we're not going to bother with those small changes. We're going to think that they're pointless or they don't have any kind of value. Whereas when we have this more steady and more measured attitude towards the timing at which things happen, that invites an acceptance, and that invites often an openness to surrender to the experience that's going to happen anyway. It's just that most of our suffering is not what's happening. It's our resistance against and our fighting against what's happening. So in a sense, it's not that we don't. People think that there are people that are patient and people that aren't. So like my original perspective would have been, I'm not a patient person, that is a patient person. What I came to realize is that patience is something that we cultivate, that we practice learning to have a different way of focusing. And I think, maturity helps. Like when we've been through enough situations and circumstances in our lives that somehow we see that there's a kind of wisdom, and we see that trying to push things before they're ready doesn't really work. But when we realize it's like everything, almost everything else psychologically, it's an ability, it's a muscle that when you suffer, for example, from a severe chronic illness, you get good at patience whether you like it or not, because you have to find some kind of way to come to terms with the challenge or the experience that you're dealing with. But yet we can be on one level patient and on another level totally impatient. It's this kind of odd thing where we understand we have to adapt our life to what's happening, but yet we constantly want things to happen tomorrow, partly because I think of the suffering that we're in. And this is why one of the things that I think really helps cultivate patience is working on our acceptance of our life as it is now. The more that even if we want, fundamentally, we feel we want our life to be different. And we might be really committed to the habits and the practices and the learning, cracking the code, to use kind of yesterday's metaphor in terms of figuring that out. But at the same time, as much as we need that commitment, we also need the surrender. We also need to find the way to accept our life as it is for today. And the more that we can find joy and acceptance and gratitude in the misery sometimes and in the struggle, the more we're able to cultivate our patience, because we're not in this like enormous reaction against our life as it is happening. And part of what I think also supports that is knowing that we have a plan, and knowing that we are attending to the overall issues we need to work with, and we're doing that work, but then we're working on finding acceptance where we are. And in a sense, the more that we can tolerate uncertainty and frustration and the difficulty, and still find the joy and the gratitude and the pleasure and the satisfaction in our life within that, the more we're building patience, in a sense, because we're learning to be with where we are rather than constantly focusing on where we want to be and our frustration at the fact that we're not there. And also, the more that we can learn to accept and be patient about what's happening now, in a sense, we're also tuning more into the timing. That whether we like it or not, and I realize that I'm about to say is a pretty controversial statement, but whether we like it or not, perhaps there is some kind of wisdom in our body, in our unconscious, in something bigger than our body or our unconscious, but there is some kind of wisdom in the circumstances that we're currently experiencing. And if that's the case, and we can surrender and we can accept that, then we reduce our suffering. Like so much of the suffering, and I kind of said it and I'll say it again, so much of our suffering is our resistance, our fighting, our resentment, our reactivity. And if we can reduce and we can calm that, maybe I think someone's trying to do building works on the street whilst I'm filming. I'm going to keep going there because we're nearly at the end. The more that we can find our acceptance in what's happening, the less we ultimately suffer. Patience is a muscle that we work out, and that muscle gets stronger the more that we use it, whether we like it or not. But the more that we can find peace and the more that we can find a sense of acceptance of where we are, that will mean we suffer less. And if we can be in touch with the wisdom, with the guidance of the timing, then actually we might have spent a whole load of money or energy or frustration chasing a whole load of paths that weren't actually the right paths, weren't the ones that were really in tune. We did it out of panicked kind of frustration. That when we're really in tune and we can really make the right decisions in the right way at the right time, life becomes so much easier as a process. And as I started talking about this book project, that was my experience here. It was for me an example of really practicing patience and working with timing and listening to my own instinct of even though I knew I needed to do this project, the time wasn't right, and then the time was right, and then because I'd been patient and I had the right relationships in the right place, the whole thing almost felt effortless. Although I don't for a second think the book writing process is going to be effortless. No doubt you will hear my grumbles and my journey with that in these vlogs in the first half of next year. So I hope that's been useful. Tomorrow is Feel Good Friday, and we're going to have another one of our Secrets Recovery live interviews from about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm still deciding which, but that will be coming tomorrow here on Everyday Alex. Thanks for watching.